Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Think Small. I'm so excited to be here with George C. Oh, I said it wrong. We just
You're
talked about this.
perfect. You're
George
perfect.
Tsz-Kwan Lam. Thank you for bearing with my diction. I'm Dr. Lisa Neher. I'm a mezzo-soprano and composer, and I started this interview series because I think in the classical music world, we really elevate big projects and grand multi-movement symphonies and 4-hour long operas and choral vocal masterworks, which are amazing, but also sometimes things that look a little like smaller scale, at least on the surface, can lead to enormous impacts and are, of course, things that take a lot of amazing artistic energy too. And so I'm really excited to have George here today to talk about some of the ways that Rhymes with Opera, a company that you are a founding member of and deeply involved in, has been creating small scale opera really for a long time, and then in some cool ways this last year. So thanks for being with us, George. This is so great.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Rhymes with Opera, you're already a company that's dedicated to chamber opera. And before we talk about the really small scale things that have happened in this last year, I would just love for you to talk about why chamber opera for you, and why do you think chamber opera has something special to offer?
Yeah, I think it goes all the way back to my just development as a composer. So I was born in Hong Kong, by the way, and I moved to Boston when I was 12. So I did a lot of my sort of formative, musical training in the States. And I remember in high school, I got interested in the idea of music and drama together. I didn't know that kind of existed. I didn't even know that was a musical. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, it was a high school production of Anything Goes that sort of opened my eyes. Like, oh my gosh, like that you can have a music and and drama together. This is amazing. And so for me personally, I've been continuing that journey in high school and then college. I went to school in Boston University, where I met Ruby Fulton, so my sort of co-composer, co-conspirator in this venture, and in our sort of 4 years there, we have completely different priorities and styles and whatnot. But where we intersected, as the Venn diagrams would, with where the intersection was, that we both really, I think there's something about the operatic medium, especially chamber opera, that spoke to us, and especially in a way that it allows us to collaborate with so many different folks, friends, at school, but since then colleagues, that allowed us to work with them and learn from them and just grow as artists. And so this whole thing really started with us wanting to do something different for our senior recital. Everyone has to do a senior recital, about 30 minutes of your own music. And so we combined that into a one act double bill that each of us wrote an opera, and then we produced it. And we liked the experience. And so a few years later, once we were in grad school at the Peabody Conservatory, we decided to say, hey, can we make this something that, at least start something that could be sustainable? And because of the scale of what we're doing, that is so small, that includes few singers, few instrumentalists, and maybe in sort of site specific or oddball and off Broadway places, that it allowed us to just get work out and learn from it and do something. And so that's the germ of the idea. And then along the way, we also are experimenting with the idea of an ensemble. So which we haven't seen in opera in a lot of the landscape. There hasn't been this kind of model where we think of ourselves almost sort of like a string quartet, but we just happen to make opera. So you see the same singers, the same composers, the same instrumentalists doing different things over the course of seasons. And so we've been doing this in earnest since 2008. And
Wow.
so we're just continuing to find the next thing. But to answer your question, I think the scale of it, the the DIY-ness of chamber opera spoke to me, because we can just get it done. We can, do something. I don't have to sort of necessarily sort of ideate on it a lot and then sort of try to get a lot of support and maybe shop it around, or depend on a commission, for example. I can instead, for me personally, I'm just speaking personally, that I can spend that energy and time just to like make it, test it, try it out, and move on. And be an artist, like as a making something, and then let it go. And so I do like that. And also I'll add to that. Sorry, I'm just like sort of,
no, this is great.
but I'll add to that. Of course, the emotional immediacy of chamber opera is really great. But I think I would add to that too, because it's so immediate, because the proximity is so close, because it's so much easier to put on relatively. I mean, it's going to cost less, even if you go with union rates, right? It's still going to cost less. So it's going to have a bigger impact, because it can reach hopefully more people. And so I also like that idea.
I love that so much. And I think, we think about, we say the word opera, and I think it quickly conjures, the biggest hall in town, and all the spectacle, and almost like the Hollywood version of what we do in classical music, and this idea that the impact can actually be greater because of that intimacy, because you can reach more people, and also because the work can be done, because we see one of the challenges with the larger opera houses is that their funding has become really dependent, like large ballet companies, on producing the big money-making pieces. And then you actually can't get work out there as much, and you can't, or you can't, it becomes more difficult for these companies to put new work out there, although many are working on that. So I love that. And I guess I'm curious too, like you mentioned musical theater was something that you were exposed to and got your juices going. Like, why opera instead of musical theater for you personally? I'm just curious.
Sure. I personally think that there's a little more, in terms of the musical language, there's a lot more flexibility in what you can do with the genre and still call it an opera. Basically, you can call anything an opera. And that's a really liberating thing. And also, opera carries with it inherently still sort of a highbrow connotation. So by sort of playing with it, by being flexible with it, it's in a way sort of subverting that as well, to contextualize in different ways. So that's also nice. Whereas there's a lot less room to do that with when you call something a musical, or a musical. Yeah, it used to be a musical comedy, but now it's just musical. And so there's you get sort of you hemmed into a certain box. Where in opera, you do have that baggage by calling it an opera, but it's something that you can play with, which is nice.
I love that. That's really great. And that speaks to me too, because as someone who writes a good amount of lyrical music myself, I remember being asked at one point, well, why don't you go into writing musical theater? And I may, but I felt a lot of these similar things that you're saying. And also for me personally, my journey was, I was like, well, I know a bunch of classical musicians. And so, that was another part of like the practical side.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Moving on and zeroing in, over the last year, Rhymes with Opera has done some really cool things with like very small opera. Your first ever pocket opera workshop was just about exactly a year ago. And that's how we met, as I got to be involved in that as a composer. And then last year, you also commissioned and produced and put on an online performance of 22 one-minute operas. And could you talk about the genesis of, maybe we could start with Pocket Opera Workshop,
Sure.
The genesis of that idea, and how did you and the team come up with that structure, and what was the structure for that workshop?
Sure. And the idea actually started about even 6-7 years ago, when we ran a program for both composers and singers in New York for 2 summers, and then also in Baltimore for 1 summer. So, and one year, I think it was in both New York and Baltimore. The idea was, over the course of a week or two, a few weeks actually, that singers, 6 singers or so and 6 composers or so, the singers would work on creating pieces that were written by the composers, and then at the end it culminates into a concert. And we had on the New York side, we had the concerts at the National Opera Center. And so it was really, that was sort of our first foray into thinking about how do we create an education / professional development program that focus especially on new music, new opera, and just add our voice to the mix, of the many wonderful young artist programs that are already out there. And so we had that sort of dormant for a while. And then last year, when we had to postpone our original production of Red Giant, which was going to be live, it was going to be for May 2020. When that was postponed, we got together and thought about, well, what can we do in the meantime to create something online to sort of continue doing work? And the idea from the five of us is to create what we call a cyber season. So a whole slate of cyber online digital experiences from May to September or so. And we all sort of split up our roles, but what I and Ruby focused on was to recreate a version of this pocket opera workshop specifically for composers, and have it be our first sort of completely online experience. So the basic structure was that everyone was assigned a singer, or I think we assigned, but everyone had a singer paired with them. We had 9 composer fellows, and it was a program that it was funded in that the composers didn't have to pay a tuition fee, and so all the composers wrote a monodrama for a singer, and then that happened sort of a month before we start the workshop, and then over the course of sort of 6 synchronous workshops, day after day during a week, the composers and both me and Ruby got together and discussed different aspects of opera and chamber opera. Also had a few guests come in talking about opera direction, and also multimedia and video and opera, and then it culminated with a closed workshop of these recorded monodramas. And Lisa, you have a wonderful piece on the program as well.
Yeah, it was so great.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
So it was a great way to see it all happening and together. And so we are hoping, actually, it was our first sort of way of going into this as a purely sort of online, anyone can join, which was great because we had, before it was only people who lived, in the proximity to Baltimore and New York who can participate. Mm-hmm. This time last year, we had folks from South America, from everywhere in the United States. Yeah. I mean, it was really great. And so we got a lot of great feedback from the workshop. And so we're at work on a different new iteration of the workshop. Hopefully it's going to be over the winter. So it's going to be sort of in November through February. Cool. And instead of a 1 week thing, it's going to be sort of spaced out throughout 3 months. So almost like a 13-week thing, where there's more interaction available between the singers and the composers, and there's even more sort of time to revise, and things like that. And so the idea is really to focus on just focus on inspiring folks to think about writing for the voice in different ways, if that hasn't been in their concepts, in their artistic sort of priority. So we wanted to just put our vote down for writing something experimental for the voice. So that's the Pocket Opera Workshop. And then also at the end of the cyber season, we were lucky enough to have had 22 of our sort of composer colleagues who generously donated their time to create a very short 1-minute piece for the ensemble for each of the 3 singers. And that was a project we called 1 Minute Operas that closed the cyber season. So that was that happened in September. So that was sort of the grand finale of the project.
That's so awesome. And I mean, I think it's been really interesting to look at form. Again, if we sort of go to that idea of like a 3-act opera and then a chamber opera, and then down to this like 1 minute. I mean, it's it's so interesting to see what's capable of being expressed in 1 minute. I mean, these operas, like, they were funny, they were really open-hearted about very difficult things going on in our country, violence against the Black community and the pandemic, and then also, these lighter ones about looking for your pants, and then also, settings of great poetry. I mean, your settings were of Shakespeare's sonnets. And what was it like to communicate with the composers that you were invited to be part of that? Like, what parameters did you offer them, and what was the process of producing them? Because one of the things I'm really interested in is how are people crafting these collaborative processes? And I think, like, that pocket opera workshop, there was clearly so much planning into how that process was going to work, so that the pieces would be written with plenty of time before that week-long time of being together and workshopping them. Whereas if the pieces had to be done that Monday and performed suddenly in 5 days, even for a closed workshop, like, that would not have worked nearly as well as the process that you all developed for the pocket opera workshop. So, like, what process did you bring into these 1 minute productions?
Yeah, and I'll start by saying that my colleague Elizabeth Halliday Kwan was sort of the brainchild and the team lead on this project. So she reached out to all the composers, and with a lot of our work with composers writing specifically for the ensemble of these two sopranos and a baritone, a very great and challenging and puzzling combination of people and voices. And so we start with giving our composers a survey that was filled out by each of the singers that really detailed a lot of the details of their voice, the eccentricities of their voice, the eccentricities of their own technique and focus, and what they love doing with and what they feel challenged by. And it's actually a survey that I think, with permission, borrowed from American Opera. They're called the American Opera Project now.
Okay.
And so, and that was from a time when I was a fellow in their composer program called Composers in the Voice. This is back in 2006 or so. And this is a very similar program when I did it with AOP, in that, all these composer fellows wrote for professional singers. And we got a sort of a survey, a 2-page survey that detailed their voice. So in the same way, we start with that, so, this is on paper, like, this is what this instrument is like. And then there's usually a back and forth between the composers and the singers, and as per usual. And I think, given that our singers have had such extensive experience with so many different types of music, by virtue of their own professionalism, but also with their association with Rheinstold Opera, in that we have also thrown so many things at them, that I think they have become very game to anything, or just as consummate professionals in that way. So once they connect with the composer, it's really, I think that's it can become quite magical, because the composer feels encouraged, empowered to try things out, to do different things, and to maybe adapt the vision or maybe not. And that's how generally the process would go, whether it's a 1 minute or evening length piece.
And about how long was that process, like, from reaching out to the folks to when the singers were recording? Do you know about? Do you remember? Maybe that's an Elizabeth question.
Yeah, I think we must have reached out to them at the start of us planning the cyber season, which would have been about April
Okay,
or
great.
so. And I know for me, I wrote my contribution in August, while I was in quarantine in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And so, it must have been a few months. And then the singers got their stuff. Yeah, so I was still finishing up in August, early August. So the singers, I think, had about a month to then record the videos. That was also, that was towards the beginning of how we all learned to video record, and get good sound and good video and such. And so that was also a learning experience, I think, for all of us. And so the singers were, again, very, very game and professional in how they got that to work, really essentially on their own, maybe with one assistant,
Wow.
and then we also had help from our colleague Zach Herkin, who is a wonderful saxophonist, who is part of our ensemble, but also a great recording engineer that helped us put the whole thing together and organize the videos and such. And so that whole process to the premiere, I think, probably about four months or so from the inception to the realization.
I love hearing about this, because I think time is just, it's so clearly across all the conversations I've been having with people about projects that are small, but they're not really small. The piece may be short, or even all 22 of them may be less music than a 3-hour opera, but still the time being the friend, and the singers having, like 4 weeks to learn and record a 1-minute piece. I think that sometimes maybe coming to a project from the outside, if folks haven't managed a project like this, they may not think, oh, music due to singers 4 weeks ahead of what, the performance or whatever. I mean, but it's true that all of this time allows for that collaboration to happen, that you're talking about, and also for the quality to be high, and for all these extra steps that we're taking now to do production and to do recording ourselves without a staff,
Right,
or something,
right.
that, maybe in a live performance, one might fundraise and have that person who comes in with all the equipment and the sound check. But when it's you're doing it on your own, and each of the singers was responsible, of course, for more than one of these. So I think it's really useful to hear about that process and that that timeline. I'm thinking about all those different pieces, and also the Rhymes with Opera the pocket opera workshop pieces that people are developing. Like, for you, what makes it opera? I mean, we talked about this a little bit about opera versus musical theater, but like, where do you personally find yourself thinking, what's the difference between opera and art song, or opera and chamber, or is there a difference?
Yeah, I think I going back to a little bit to our collective ideas of what opera is. What I still really enjoy is playing around with the expectation, right? So with the baggage that the audience comes with when you frame it as an opera, and that's one thing. I think that gives a little bit more room for me to sort of play around with, like, is this opera? Is this not opera? And so that having that room, again, it makes me sort of attracted to calling it as such. I also really do find it fascinating, the human voice, in the way that it's trained in the Western classical tradition, that to project without amplification, right? So it's something, I think it's unique. It's something that can be celebrated and can be made into something that's really, really interesting and different. But and even if you amplify it, it's still a particular technique that I am drawn to, and I also like the idea of why opera, that it's a great way to sort of to heighten the emotion for me on something, to really drill down a lot to one specific sort of moment or just sort of a character that I personally find a little bit more flexible, again, more doable in opera than perhaps in a book musical. Having said that, there's also a lot of folks who are working on experimental musicals, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of and which has a long history, from the concept musical, of Company and such, right? To things that are constantly on and off Broadway. And so on the other hand, you also have operas that don't do that much in terms of pushing the envelope. And so I think, I don't know. In short, I think it's a calling it an opera is a convenience,
Mm-hmm.
but also it's kind of it's nice. It's a play. It's as in like it's playful,
Mm-hmm.
because if we are talking about opera, folks think it's big and grand and met, but when you come in with a lot of these DIY and small companies like ours and our colleagues like Experiments in Opera, Guerrilla Opera, and lots of different folks, working, especially in urban areas, where there's, a way for you to get venues and get singers and get things together. I think once audiences start to see that also as opera and chamber opera and connect it to, the chamber opera that's already here, I mean, already in the canon, like Britain, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's nice. It's an extension of a conversation that we can contribute to.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you mentioned Britain. One of my dream projects personally is to do a gender flipped Curlew River.
Great.
It's like one of
Yeah.
my someday,
Yeah.
someday that's happening. I'm curious, like out of these mini projects that were only one part of what you were all producing this last year, like did anything come out of those experiments? I mean, you've already talked about Pocket Opera Workshop in its new iteration. Any other things come out of it that maybe you didn't anticipate or that you're hoping to continue on in the future to explore more, either yourself as a composer or through Rhymes with Opera, or both?
Anything that was unexpected, you mean you
Yeah,
said,
like
or
anything that's, I mean, I think like, so I work with a lot of composers who might come to me and say, I've been working on my dream, like 3-act opera in my free time for 5 years. And if I start to talk to them about like, cool, why don't we, in addition to working on that, maybe write a tiny opera that we get on its feet faster? There can be a feeling sometimes of like settling,
I
like,
see,
oh,
right,
I'm settling.
right,
Or sometimes people might have the reverse, like, oh, I'm just going to do this one little piece because that's all I can deal with in the pandemic
yeah,
or in life. And it
yeah,
can feel like it's tiny. And then what I'm curious about is like sometimes things happen that are like have way bigger effects than maybe
hmm,
we anticipated, or maybe good, maybe challenging, who knows. But did anything
yeah.
come out of these projects you didn't anticipate or that are
Hmm.
inspiring you for what you might do in the future?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm sort of currently thinking more about is how I can um, adjust my practice in such a way that I can really increase the impact of what I do, to maximize how much I can reach or what messages I'm sending or how I'm getting people to think and or focus on different ways, specifically on underrepresented conversations, communities, individuals, places, and I come at this because partly from just working in opera for and in as a composer for for a while now, and coming to a point and thinking, well, look, I only really have so many more years of work, that I can get out. And so what is the point? And so if let's say I have a few more decades, right? Honestly, how many more minutes of music is that, and how many people are actually going to hear it?
Mm.
The answer is that not many. So the idea then is, well, then how do I really what do I really care about? Like what do I really want to spend the time doing, and in a way that I can reach more, in a meaningful way, not just sort of
Mm-hmm.
like numbers, for example.
Sure.
And so for me, the I perhaps I'm not sure if this is a surprising thing that but it is part of what I've sort of thought about in recent years. And so for me, I personally, I'm gearing more towards projects that are connected with a community or with a
Mm.
place in some way. So currently, I'm working on I'm serving as an artist in residence at University Settlement, which is a community service organization in New York City, based in New York City, that has a whole network of different community centers and has a rich history that traces all the way back to the tenements, for example. And my project is focused on transforming existing recorded oral history recordings with Chinese Americans and musicalize them in some way and create an app that you can use while you're in Chinatown to walk around and be able to automatically hear voices that's associated with different places, but also with music that's inspired by the way they speak. And so, I'm sort of going on with this idea and trying to adapt it in different ways and think about, well, for my work with the Rhymes with Opera, how might I also think about connecting with recorded oral history, for example, and musicalize them with music, because that gets at the heart of actually what I've always wanted to really think about, like why musicalize something, why turn it into music, and that's the grand experiment, right? Let's do something with it and see what happens. But while we're doing it, why don't we also highlight voices that have been underrepresented in some way, so that we can raise the profile and awareness and positively affect folks' perception of certain ideas or certain places and people. And so that's for me, that's sort of a surprising development for me, I suppose, that I'm extending and continuing my work in that way and trying to figure out, it's not to be morbid or anything, but you only have so many more pieces that are left. So let's make them count. And how do we do that? And so and you don't have to dwell on it, but at least it's a good sort of launching point to think about things that would sustain me as an artist.
I love that. And I do think, we spend in classical music, we spend so many years training, and we even can have this mentality of sort of the perpetual student, which is wonderful, but can also be very limiting, that I'm not ready to release my album, or I'm not ready to write my dream piece, or, I just remember having these moments when at the time a voice teacher I was studying with was hitting a certain age where her voice biologically was changing, and she was a soprano, her voice was getting lower. And she said, I have to record these pieces. I got to record these pieces now. I got to put this album out now, because the rep I'm going to do in 5 years will be different. I'll still be singing, but it won't be these songs. And it really gave me, in a good way, a sense of seize the day, and especially to be having that conversation with someone who is such an incredible working artist, teacher, and recitalist, and
Right.
and who had this mission, that she was like, I know I'm hitting a point, and I want to do this work.
Yeah.
And the kind of work I will do will change.
Right.
And I'm an athlete, and I won't have the same instrument.
Precisely.
Yeah. So same thing for composers, that our lives are limited. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. So that's I agreed, and I think it's seizing the day. It's easier said than done, with so many little things, and now we can be at all meetings all the time. But still, I think it's a good thing to aspire to.
I love that. So my last, two more questions for you. I know this has been so great, but I did want to just call out that Rhymes with Opera is unique, like you said, that you're a collective of performers as well as composers. And that group sort of performs as an ensemble across many different projects. And, how did that come to be? Because you talked about how you and Ruby met, but how did it come to be that the ensemble of performers joined you? And I think it's unique. What would you recommend to people if they looked at that model and said, I am very interested in that model? How could you give them some advice about investigating that model and seeing if it's right for them?
Yeah, it started with me and Ruby, and we basically just expanded it with the singers whom we love working with. And then also in about 2013 or so, we decided to try to expand it to sort of a regular roster of instrumentalists, also whom we love working with as well. And that started from there. And the idea of this band and ensemble really was there from the beginning when we, were adding people into the mix and then, creating a board of directors for a nonprofit and such, and really sort of solidified our mission as such as an ensemble. And I think it's a growing ensemble. I hope it is, so that the idea is static of the ensemble. Again, hopefully, but the personnel may change. But the idea is still a working sort of chamber ensemble for opera. And I mean, if there are folks who are interested in such a model, I think the more the merrier. It's tricky because I'm working on grants for the company now, and some of the grantors do want to see how these pieces can have legs, for example, to move to different, to be able to be restaged or produced by different outfits and organizations as such. But when they're so created in such a bespoke way specifically for our singers, I think it's tricky to have it be something that is as easily transferable as perhaps another thing. But I think there's also a benefit here because if they are still going to be small, like our works are going to be small, and perhaps if other your viewers and listeners are interested in creating something like an ensemble, the ensemble will still be relatively small. I mean, if you even look at sort of Alarm Will Sound, it's only about 20, 30 people. It's not like a huge undertaking. So the pieces that are written for such an ensemble, for us, 9 to 10 people, including instrumentalists, for example, it's still readily mountable by other groups. But I would say, the rewards are great because you get to, the best thing about Rhymes with Opera is that, we know each other so well professionally that it becomes well, I it's fun to work together, to rehearse and to create, but it also creates an instrument, a collective instrument that is continue to be more and more refined and more nuanced and more magical. And so I think that's something that you can really get with with a string quartet that stays together for a number of years that you can't get in a stock company, summer stock, or things like that. Which I mean, that's great. That is the model, right? Like you go to you do one-offs. On the other hand, historically, you have opera companies, roaming opera companies with the same people, and you go to Europe, you're that house tenor, right? You're that house baritone, and so there is a historical and contemporary precedent for the model. But I think that the greatest thing about it is that that you see the collective instrument grow and transform into things that other people can continually, composers can continually work with, and designers and directors as well. But that it becomes this thing that is, it just gets better with everything we do.
I love that, and I totally have such jealousy for my people who are in string quartets or woodwind quintets, right? Because this is that thing that isn't as easily accessible in the States to singers outside of choral, and choral is wonderful, but it's its own beast, right. Or even very small, like 8 or 6 or 4 people choral ensemble is different than opera and chamber music that involves instruments and voices. So that's really inspiring. Finally, this has been so much fun. I did want to ask you if you could share a little bit about what's coming up for you this season with Rhymes with Opera.
Yeah, so we're still finalizing our season because we just finished with our. I mentioned earlier that our production last year in 2020 was postponed. So this year was postponed to this year. We just ended our season with a our first ever live digital production in June 20th, where the 3 singers were live broadcasting from 3 different cities: Rochester, Baltimore, and New York, and it worked.
It was fantastic. Red Giant. It was so amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. And so, So the next season, we're working on it. But one of the things that I'm excited about is that we received a grant from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council to support a series of virtual salons. So we've always done a series of salons, almost basically at least once a year, sometimes more than that, but at least once a year, where in New York City we gather around artists whom we want to feature, and generally folks who are working with the voice. And it'll be a low-key sort of sharing works in progress. It's a potluck. Everyone brings some food, and we just listen and have a good time. And so last year, because everything was online, so we did 2 versions of this salon, but online. So because it was online, we could expand it to different locations, featuring artists from different geographical areas in the U.S. And so it was such a success that this year we are going to continue that with the support of LMCC, and so that'll be part of our season. Another thing that we're working on is also a new version of the pocket opera workshop for composers, and so that'll again hopefully be a sort of a 13-week thing, sort of a little bit longer term, but a way for composer fellows to really dig in and work with the singers even more.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And I hope everyone checks out these and also the rest of the season that will be forthcoming. Thank you so much, George, for coming and sharing about Rhymes with Opera and about your own work. I'm going to post links to George's website and to Rhymes with Opera's website in the comments right after we finish. And just excited to see what you all create next. So thanks for being here on Think Small.